Hey guys, Aaron Cybertron Zeng here, and today I am bringing you my first team analysis / breakdown for VGC 2018. My goal for this upcoming year is really to do one of these for every team that I build or use on Road to Ranked or in competition, so I'll do my very best to get them out, but hopefully you guys find them enjoyable and can learn a thing or two from them. I've done a couple of them in the past for all the VGC formats that I've played in, and you can check out a couple, and I'll actually reference the one in this very team analysis, but yeah, it basically breaks down all the Pokemon team members, the EV spreads, the movesets. I also kind of talk about just, how I built the team, what the weaknesses are, how you play with the team, and in general, after watching it, you should get some good sense of really how you can use the team yourself. In addition, I have uploaded a Showdown export of the team and a QR code, so if you want to try this team either on Showdown or on the Pokemon Online ladder, go ahead and try it out. Both of those are linked in the description below. I would love for you guys to try them out and use it, and one of the reasons why I want to do more of these team analyses is because now we have QR codes, and so it's a lot easier for players to really just try out teams and play with it online. So yeah, hopefully you guys find this enjoyable. Of course, I'll be talking about the Sand team that I used on Road to Ranked for the first 9 episodes, so if you want to check those out, also go watch those episodes. And I think how I'm going to do this is typically after I finish up with the team on Road to Ranked or after a competition, I will try to post one of these. So yeah, hopefully you guys find this enjoyable. If you do, please show support by leaving a like in the video and giving me any feedback. I'd really appreciate it. And without further ado, let's just jump into this one. So I kind of always talk about how I break the team, or how I build the team, I should say, before breaking it down. So this team was heavily drawn from the Japanese Sand archetype that was seen in VGC 2015. For those that might be newer to the channel or didn't follow me competitively back then, I used a version of that archetype at the Massachusetts Regional Championships, where I just missed out on the top 8. I finished 9th that year. And then I edited the team and brought it to the US National Championships a couple of months later, where I got top 4 and ended up qualifying for the World Championships from that. So it's an archetype that I really like and I felt comfortable with, and it's one that I felt like could still succeed in VGC 2018, especially after seeing some of the successful Battle Spot double teams from Sun and Moon. So if you are interested in a team breakdown for Japanese Sand from 2015, go check out the link in the description below. I did do a breakdown of the team that I brought to US Nationals that year, and it looks very similar to this one. You guys can kind of get some more, kind of breakdowns on the archetype in general, and just listen a little bit to my thoughts back then a couple of years ago. So I thought that was kind of an interesting parallel. But yeah, with Japanese Sand, you typically want to start with Tyranitar. That is really the staple member to any Sand team. So I started with Scarf Tyranitar just because that is what I had in my team back in 2015, and it's what I was most comfortable with. And then I ended up choosing Excadrill. I did use Excadrill at Regionals that year, but I brought Landorus Incarnate form over Excadrill at Nationals. But I felt like, for a newer format, Excadrill, especially for online ladder, it just is a little bit more useful, / it's faster and can kind of steamroll through a lot of teams. So I decided, okay, I'm going to go with Tyranitar and Excadrill as the main core. So after that, obviously you're weak to a bunch of things when you use Tyranitar and Excadrill, the main one being, say, Intimidate and Earthquake, so Landorus Incarnate or Landorus Therian form being one of the biggest offenders there. So I needed a Mega Evolution. You typically see Salamence with this archetype, but I didn't feel a reason to deviate from it. It's really, really good in terms of synergy. Not only being able to intimidate, but also being very fast, being able to set up a Tailwind, being able to hit for really good synergy with Tyranitar and Excadrill, and also being flying type, so you're not affected by Earthquake. So that seemed like a pretty obvious member to stick on. These archetypes, typically they'll have a lot of core members, and I didn't see a reason to change from that. ROTOM-WASH was the next member added. ROTOM-WASH obviously being one of my favorite Pokemon of all time to use competitively in VGC, and I wanted to try him out again in this new format. It's a bulky water type, so that's really helpful against these ground types, and also in general just gives you more coverage against ground type users and Earthquake spammers. Finally, I wanted a way to shut down Trick Room, and I also wanted, a bunch of Z-move users, either 1 or 2. So Aegislash was the first one that was pretty obvious. It's one that is a comfort pick, and is one that I used back in 2015. That one was a Life Orb variant, but the moveset was the same. Ghost typing is really nice, and if, the Ghost Z-move on Aegislash just hits really hard, even against Pokemon that resist it. So it's very, very difficult to switch into Aegislash with the Ghost Z-move. Finally, I rounded out the team with Tapu Bulu. I had a Mungus back in my 2015 team, but I wanted to try out something else, and I felt like Bulu was obviously a newer Pokemon that would fit with the team pretty well. The grassy terrain synergy is also nice because it reduces Earthquake damage, and in general, Bulu is one of those Pokemon that can operate outside and in Tailwind, and I felt like it was just a pretty solid member in general to help the team out. So I threw on the Z move on that as well, just because a Grassium Z Tapu Bulu also hits like a truck. So that's basically how I constructed the team. It was a little bit easier to make this team because I had a lot of reference points, and it was basically just editing a team I had from a few years ago. But this archetype in general, has a lot of options, and I'll talk a little bit more about future options in the end of the kind of discussion. But yeah, I was pretty happy about these 6 Pokemon at the end of the day. So, breaking down each Pokemon, the movesets and whatnot. Scarftar, as I mentioned, really good member. You always want Rock Slide on Scarftar, that one's self-explanatory. You typically want a Dark-type attack as well. I opted for Assurance over Crunch because with Scarftar, you're really fast, but you're still slower than Mega Salamence and Excadrill and Sand. So what that allows you to do is combo attacks off, like Hyper Voice Assurance, Rock Slide Assurance, Iron Head Assurance, and that often allows you to pick up knockouts that you otherwise wouldn't. I didn't really have too many situations where in the early game that came into effect, but there were definitely some games on Rotorank where like the Assurance ended up allowing me to pick up knockouts where I wouldn't otherwise in the like end game or whatnot. So that's nice. Superpower, really nice for normal type coverage, or I mean as in to beat normal types, and that's especially important against Mega Kangaskhan. You're not able to knock out Mega Kangaskhan's, like one-shot them with Superpower, but you do like 70 to 90%, which is really nice because that's just enough for, an attack like Hyper Voice or Thunderbolt or Flash Cannon to knock out the Kangaskhan. So you can really chain attacks off there, and it's nice to be able to chunk Kangaskhan for a lot of damage. Finally, I opted for Ice Punch just because that's really nice against Landorus and, say, Salamence. And it actually did come into play a lot of times on Rotorank. We saw a bunch of games where I could just Hyper Voice Ice Punch immediately for a knockout. My opponent couldn't do anything in return. I opted for Ice Punch over Ice Beam. I did use Ice Beam in Nats in 2015, but it didn't help me that much at the end of the day. And I think with Ice Punch, since I am attack anyway, or plus attack, just in terms of EVs, max attack, whereas Ice Beam doesn't really do anything after you get the knockout against Salamence or Landorus, whereas Ice Punch, if I'm locked into, I can still do a little bit of damage, more than Ice Beam would if I want to stay in. So I opted for that. Pretty self-explanatory moveset. EV spread, very simple as well, just max attack, max speed, and Jolly Nature, just so you can outspeed more things. You can deviate for some bulk, but I didn't really feel like I needed any bulk, and I just wanted to hit as hard as possible. Also wanted to be able to at least speed tie other Scarf Tyranitars, if not just outspeed them, because then you can just one-hit them with Superpower. So yeah, pretty self-explanatory, not the most complicated moveset, but just wanted to delve into it a little bit more. Next Pokemon was Excadrill. Excadrill is a relatively straightforward Pokemon. You typically want to run Drill Run, Iron Head, Rock Slide, and Protect. You could go for like Swords Dance or Earthquake over some of those attacks, but I just opted for the most basic set. Went for Life Orb just because I like hitting as hard as possible, and I don't like just using one Z move and then my damage power really being reduced, because Excadrill is one of those Pokemon that you kind of want to on the field for as long as possible, and you kind of want it just to be doing constant damage when it's out on the field. So I opted for the Life Orb there. Max attack, Adamant Nature. So I didn't go for Jolly first of all, and you can see that I don't have that much speed investment on this Excadrill because, when you are in the sand, I really don't feel like you need that much speed investment because you're outspeeding so many things anyway. So with this EV spread in the sand, you outspeed Jolly, Scarf, Landorus, and anything slower. And obviously, if anything's not Scarf, you're going to be able to outspeed that, like Pheromosa. So you cover everything that doesn't have any speed boosts, and even Scarf users, you go up to Landorus. Reason why I didn't opt for any more speed is because I also have Salamence with Tailwind, and I often setted Tailwind up with Excadrill, so it's like I already have Tailwind, so I might as well just dedicate some of those EVs up until bulk. So I put the rest of it basically into HP. Probably could have optimized the spread a little bit more since I'm running Life Orb, could have made the HP number a round HP number just because I actually didn't consider that, but in general that doesn't impact it too much. But yeah, basically reasoning with this is I'm going to be setting up Sand and Tailwind most of the games anyway, so might as well just dedicate some more EVs to bulk so I could survive attacks that I normally might not otherwise, attacks like Hydro Pump from a Rotom-WASH. And so that was also, pretty self-explanatory set, but the key difference here is running Admin over Jolly and basically dedicating a lot more to bulk than speed. Next Pokemon was Mega Salamence. This is the exact same spread that I used in 2015. I actually probably should have optimized a little bit more and put more into attack from special attack. But yeah, the spread back then, the reason why I had 44 in attack was because with Double Edge, you'd be able to get the one-hit KO on Mega Gardevoir if it had no bulk, and then against Ludicolo, even if you were intimidated. Nowadays, obviously, Aegislash has been nerfed, so I would probably dedicate some more into attack just because Double Edge hits really hard. And in the end, yeah, there were some games where, I wasn't sure whether Double Edge could knock out or not. Had I had more attack investment, probably would have been a little bit more confident on it. But this is a spread that I was comfortable with a couple of years ago, so I wanted to use it just for convenience sake. Hyper Voice, Double Edge, very self-explanatory. You typically want both of those on a Mega Salamence set. Opted for Tailwind just because more speed control is really nice, and I didn't really feel like I needed an attack like Draco Meteor, Flamethrower, Earthquake, or whatnot. And finally, Protect, that one also very straightforward. Next Pokemon is Rotom-WASH, you know, a staple member for some of the biggest teams and runs that I've had in competitive VGC. Obviously, World Championships in 2013 and then the National Championships in 2015, which I got top 4 in both years. Rotom was a very staple member to both of those teams, really the MVP in 2013, one of the biggest MVPs in 2015. Same moveset, Hydro Pump, Bulu, Thunderbolt, Protect, and then opted for a very similar EV spread to what I had in 2015, so, you know, like max HP, Calm with 92 special defense, which I believe allows you to survive max special attack Solar Beam from Charizard Y. Opted for some defense, and the main difference was back in 2015 I had like a lot of speed investment, specifically to outspeed Bisharp, just because Bisharp was a really big concern back in 2015 specifically at the tournaments that I used it in, but Bisharp not nearly as much of a concern, so I basically just took all the EVs out for speed and put it into special attack so I could hit a lot harder, just because with Rotom, when you don't have any special attack investment, you really feel the difference between that and running more special attack investment and, say, Modest Nature. So that was really nice, just be able to hit more hard, and Hydro Pump, even if you're not Modest, like with 108 special attack, does a lot of damage, especially when Sun isn't up, so I really like that. And the little bit of speed investment just allowed me to outspeed any Rotoms, and anything in that speed tier that had no speed investment. Next member was Aegislash. So I used Life Orb Aegislash back in Nationals in 2015. Obviously, I have the Life Orb on the Excadrill, so I opted for Ghost DMZ here. This one, also very similar to my 2015 set, although I opted for more speed this time around. One of the weaknesses on my Nats team in 2015 was that I felt like it didn't have enough speed on Aegislash. I actually still feel like that was a weakness for this Aegislash. I think I probably should have dedicated more speed to it. But in the end, I wanted a Modest Nature, and with the EV spread, or with that speed investment, in Tailwind, you're able to outspeed Kartana, max speed Kartana, anything slower, which I felt like was a decent benchmark to reach for. And the rest in bulk, you know, Aegislash is so bulky when it is in shield form, so I didn't really want to give up too much of that. And Modest, max special attack just to hit as hard as possible. Moveset, very self-explanatory. Shadow Ball, Flash Cannon just for coverage. Obviously, you're going to want the Ghost DMZ with Shadow Ball. Wide Guard obviously helps out a lot against spread attacks, especially like Earthquake, which we saw come into play a lot of times on Road to Rank. Finally, King Shield, obviously, because that is what you are going to need on Aegislash. So, pretty self-explanatory, but I like the set a lot. Finally, Tapu Bulu. So I opted for Tapu Bulu with some speed investment, max attack, and some HP investment. Wood Hammer and Horn Leech are typically seen on Bulu. Opted for Substitute because I felt like there were probably opportunities where I could have gotten it off in games, where especially with Tailwind up, didn't end up really using it very much. Bulu in general was probably the least common member on the team, but it was still kind of nice to have it in the games that I did bring it in, because I was able to like really threaten major threats with one-shots with Grass DMZ. Speed investment just for Tailwind numbers, and then the rest in HP. Max attack just because, once again, Bulu, one of those Pokemon where you really want to just hit as hard as possible and take advantage of all these added boosts, like from the Z move or from the grassy terrain. So, pretty much wraps it up for all the Pokemon, the movesets, and the EV spreads. Once again, if you want to try these teams out, there is a QR code in the description below, as well as a paste, so you can try it on Showdown as well. Of course, feel free to edit the team however you may see fit and however you may like it to. So, in terms of playing with the team, if you want to get some actual battling perspective, go check out Road to Ranked episodes 1 through 9. There is a playlist linked in the description below as well. But if you kind of just want a summary, basically my go-to leads were typically Tyranitar, Excadrill. That one is just really fast and hard-hitting. It does have a lot of weaknesses though, so you want to bring those Tyranitar, Excadrill against teams where they have like no counterplay. Because against teams that have, say, Landorus T, where they can just lead it against you, you are starting off in a really poor position, and this team has weaknesses in terms of maintaining momentum. So if you're starting from behind, that's really bad. So you want to lead properly with this team. So TTR Excadrill you typically want to bring against teams that, say, maybe don't have Landorus, don't have their opposing weather, where you can kind of just hit really hard right from the start. Salamence plus Rotom and then Salamence plus Aegislash were probably my two other really common leads. With Rotom, you get a lot of nice defensive coverage, and you have the Tailwind threat. Rotom also checks a lot of threats against Tyranitar Excadrill, like Landorus, and so a lot of teams often would lead Landorus, and then I would, you know, kind of counter that by leading Salamence Rotom, so then suddenly the Landorus is in a really awful position. And then Aegislash is really nice too, because the Intimidate covers for Aegislash, so you get that initial Intimidate off, which obviously reduces Earthquake damage, and just any physical damage in general. Aegislash also hits really hard, whereas Salamence kind of supports it a little bit more and can set up Tailwind. So ideally, you kind of want to just set up Tailwind and sweep from there. Maybe keep Tyranitar, Excadrill either in the beginning or kind of for the late game. You would bring Aegislash or Bulu, or I would, against teams that didn't have many switch-ins. So teams where you can really get a strong Ghost Z move off or a Grass Z move off, and they didn't have many options to switch in. Basically, you kind of want to start with the lead and just steamroll from there. I think a lot of the games that I lost, I often fell into a really big hole very early on, and I would try to dig myself out from this hole. But with this team, it's tough to kind of recover once you lose a lot of momentum. Finally, it's really important to conserve your offensive threats, mainly Salamence, T-Tar, and Excadrill well due to their weaknesses, because Salamence and T-Tar are 4 times weak to Ice and Fighting respectively. Excadrill is also weak to a bunch of types, and so yeah, it's very easy to just get one-shot with your main offensive attackers, so you have to be really careful with that, and that's one thing that I had to learn really as I played with the team. So, future considerations with the Pokemon that I use specifically. I already talked about a bunch of these as I broke down the team, but, you know, if you are interested in trying out your own version of the team or really just trying out different ways of making this archetype work, feel free. These are just some of the recommendations I would have. For Tyranitar, you could take some EVs out, make it more bulky, while still maintaining the Choice Scarf. You can also definitely try out a Dragon Dance Z-move variant, which is something that we do often see on the newer versions, now that Z-moves are a thing. With the Dark Z-move, you hit for really, really hard, especially against Cresselia, but against things in general, just very strong. With Excadrill, there's not much you can really change, but you can try a Focus Sash or Ground DMZ variant. Also, you can try out Swords Dance and Earthquake on that move pool, or just some other more niche attacks that you might normally not want to use depending on your team. Salamence, like I mentioned, I'd probably want to put more attack investment, maybe more in special defense as well. Could consider Hasty as well, just because Hidden Power Ice has dunked me a fair amount of times with Salamence from random Pokemon like Heatran. Of course, you could consider Draco, Meteor, Flamethrower, Fire Blast, Earthquake. Those are all very viable attacks. I didn't opt for any of them, but those are all moves that could very well fit your team depending on how you have built it. Rotom-WASH. Using a 50% Pinch Berry, an Electro Web as a move, that was those were both on a Sand team that I tried out before Roto Ranked for 2018, back in Battle Spot Doubles. Really strong option. I opted for Citrus just because I was more comfortable with it, and in the end, I didn't feel like I really needed the Pinch Berry, and I don't really have too many regrets about that, but certainly a very viable option now that they are a thing. Putting more speed investment could help as well against opposing Rotoms. I didn't really feel like I needed it, but that's also an option. Aegislash, like I mentioned, this one definitely more speed investment would have helped. Fitting Substitute on would have been cool, although I didn't really feel like I really needed to with Shadow Ball and Flash Cannon. I liked having that coverage. You could also run a Weakness Policy variant, which is pretty common, as well as Life Orb versions, which are also common. And Lefty is also one of the more common items on Aegislash. Finally, on Bulu, could have considered running more speed investment, like Max Speed Jolly, just to really be able to outspeed things, even outside of Tailwind, but that was something that I didn't really know too much about going into it. And then probably finding a move attack over Substitute would have been nice, just because Sub was really useless for me there. So, Leech Seed could have been interesting, just another attack like Superpower could have been interesting, Superpower or Stone Edge even. So a bunch of options with Bulu. Bulu definitely more underexplored, / could have had a lot more room to use it on this team. Was definitely the least common member. But, yep, these are just some considerations you might want to kind of keep in your mind if you are trying out this team specifically and want to make your own edits. So, I kind of want to talk about the Sand archetype a little bit in general, just because, you know, I have used the Sand team. So, if you are interested in trying out Sand, obviously you don't need to use the 6 same Pokemon that I used. And some common Pokemon that you typically see with Sand are, in terms of support, Amoonguss or Cresselia. Amoonguss really for redirection and for Spore. Cresselia in general is just a great support Pokemon for any team. You might often also see Fire types. So, for example, Heatran, Charizard, Volcarona, Rotom Heat, and the new Mega, or not the new Mega, the new Ultra Beast. Those are all Pokemon you might want to consider. I see Volcarona and Heatran a lot, but the others are definitely common as well, or should be considered. Rotom Heat was very common on the archetype back during 2015. Bulky water types, I used Rotom-WASH obviously, but you can also consider other options like Azumarill, Milotic, Tapu Fini, and Suicune, all fit the team really nicely. And then electric types in general also give the team some more coverage and synergy, so Zapdos, Tapu Koko, and Thundurus are the most common variants. You obviously could consider something to replace Excadrill, like that Landorus Incarnate form, or maybe even Stoutland, but I think Excadrill was probably the best one to start off with. Landorus was really good in 2015, at least the Incarnate form. I think it might be a little bit weaker nowadays, especially with more Pokemon that threaten it, but still a decent pick. And it actually was the MVP of my Nats team back in 2015, so something you might want to consider. overall, Sand, I think, is a really strong and fun archetype to play with. The archetype, the furthest I had gone was top 16 at Worlds in 2015. Tobias Koshitsky used a Sand variant with basically all the Pokemon that I've mentioned here. I think it was like Salamence, Rotom-He, Aegislash, Milotic, Tyranitar. I don't remember the last one off the top of my head, but yeah, basically the exact same Pokemon you'd expect still being used. And in general, I think it's a relatively straightforward archetype to play with, but there's a lot of room for your own personal take on it, which is really cool. It's also like a little bit more offensive than defensive cores, and so that is something that I like using with. But you do have to be really careful because your main members are a little bit more vulnerable to common attacks. So to round it off, this kind of ties into weaknesses, as I was mentioning earlier. Opposing weather, always a concern to deal with because, you would think, oh yeah, it's sand against rain, sand against sun, I should have the optimal matchup. But if your opponent plays well with their weather and they have ways to manually set up weather, for example, rain dance on something, as we did see on Road to Rank, skill swap on something to, like Cresselia, to reset the sun, that could be really bad because, for example, you really want to bring Excadrill against sun, but if your opponent is able to set up the sun and you don't have Tailwind, Excadrill is basically a sitting duck because Charizard's pretty much always paired with Landorus, and so you have a lot of problems there. So opposing weather, you have to play really careful around. Opposing speed control, I mean, that's a weakness for any team, but this team specifically does suffer a lot if your opponent's able to set up their own Tailwind, just because my Pokemon are kind of mid-tier speed. If you look at the Rotom, the Aegislash, and the Bulu, and the Excadrill of Sand isn't up. So you do have to watch out for that. Trick Room, obviously, always a concern as well. And this kind of ties into the next point, which is mid-tier speeds when Tailwind isn't up. So if you don't set up Tailwind, then the Rotom, the Aegislash, and the Bulu, chances are they're going to go after your opponent's Pokemon. So you do have to be careful about that. I've kind of talked about this a lot, but losing major threats is really bad for this team, especially to surprise one-hit KO moves. Some examples I can refer to in Road to Ranked is losing Tyranitar to a Focus Blast, even switching in Tyranitar into a Focus Splash from Charizard Y, Heatran going for HP Ice. The reason why these are so bad is because these Pokemon often, give so much coverage against so many threats, so if you lose them immediately, especially when you don't see it coming, that is really bad. That's obviously the case for any team in VGC, but this team specifically because these Pokemon are weak, 4 times a week, so you can have tech moves like a Focus Blast, like Hidden Power Ice, and that can really cause a lot of problems. So you have to be very careful about that. Keep asking yourself, like, do I need this Pokemon to beat a specific Pokemon in my opponent's team? Another example I can kind of allude to in Road to Ranked is losing Salamence to an HP Ice from Heatran, and then not having anything to deal with the Mungus because the rest of my team really doesn't deal very well with the Mungus. So be very careful about that. Also, be careful about bulky Pokemon that can take a hit and then KO you in return. One of the biggest examples is Cresselia, which can take attacks easily and then Ice Beam in return, specifically against Salamence, but in general, this is always a concern. You do have to be very careful about positioning and momentum in general, and I kind of talk about this one specific point about locking into attack with Scarf Tyranitar early game. I do lead with Scarf Tar a lot, which is very nice. I actually realized I didn't mention this on the lead slide, but Tyranitar plus Salamence is a really nice lead as well, and I don't know why I forgot to mention that, but locking into an attack with Scarf Tar is bad because a lot of the times, early game, you might be able to get that KO immediately, but then that allows your opponent to get a free switch in, and now you're locked into attack, which often forces a switch which your opponent can capitalize off of. So when you are leading with Scarf Tyranitar, you really want to be able to say, okay, is this important? Is this knockout so important enough, or does this lead give me such a lead advantage, or even if I get a knockout and my opponent gets this free switch in, I'll still be in a good spot. Just be careful about that, especially if you're locking yourself into something like Ice Punch, which obviously isn't nearly as good when you're scarfed because it's very specific towards very specific threats. And finally, this kind of ties into the last weakness, which is just where poor positioning in general is really bad for this team. You don't have as many options to switch out because you don't have bulkier options like Cresselia or like Tapu Fini or Heatran. So without the option to switch into bulkier Pokemon, it is very easy to lose momentum. It is very easy for your opponent to predict whatever is switching in. So you have to be careful about that. So this team, more offensive, but at the cost of not having as much bulk and not having as much switching synergy. And your opponent really can capitalize off that, which we did see happen a decent amount on Road to Rank. So that pretty much concludes it for this breakdown for this team. I hope you guys found it helpful. Once again, the QR code and the paste are in the description below, and I think this should really set you guys up for either trying out this team or trying out the archetype in general, and I hope that you guys find it helpful. I really like doing these. I think they are relatively insightful / offer a lot more content outside of just battling videos, and hopefully you guys find it helpful as well. So yeah, thank you guys for watching. If you indeed find it enjoyable and useful, please share support by leaving a like in the video. I will be back with Road to Ranked very soon with a brand new team, and once again, feel free to try out this team yourself, make your edits, and let me know what you think about it. So yeah, that's it for this one, guys. Thank you guys for watching, and I will catch you guys next time. Alright, peace.